I think with that, we should get started here, David.
Why
Um,
not?
yeah, yeah.
Let's.
And maybe just before we even start, a huge thank you for Steve being here with us tonight. Just a legend in the industry. Maybe just quickly to remind everybody of our upcoming
Yeah.
events. We have Henry Cowan, who's actually on the show tonight in the audience. So we're super excited for Captain Henry on February 26th. We got Johnny King, who I know is a big aficionado of Steve's SF blend, and has been on the show, pretty much every season. We're super excited to have Johnny on March 5th. Jason Taylor, Fly On By, one of our favorite fly tyers for sure. Another SF blend aficionado on March 19th. And then we're going to close out April 2nd with Blaine Chocolate. So hope
We're gonna have
all
the
of you can
chocolate
attend.
factory. It's gonna be great.
Exactly. So with that, David, why don't you take it away?
Well, everybody, if you don't have packages with this silver and red label, you're missing out. And our guest tonight, Steve Farrar, you know, has really influenced all of us, specifically with synthetics, and came up with the SF blend. And of course, a great friend of Bob Popovics, which is part of our tribute this season. And Steve, welcome to the show. We're so flattered you wanted to join us, and I can't thank you enough personally.
Thank you, David, and all. Hi, everybody.
So, you know, before we really get into the fly tying, how did you get into this wonderful, game of fly fishing?
Well, it's I started late. I didn't start fly fishing and tying till I was 45, 46. So it was a late start. I stumbled into a fly shop in Red Bank called the Fly Hatch when it first opened up. And I would go there occasionally, maybe a couple times a week, and just look around, kind of familiarize myself with it. I was an avid beach fluke fisherman at the time, but it was all spinning gear. And the fly fishing kind of caught my eye. I was asking questions about it. And I bought a setup to fish for fluke with the fly rod, sinking line, a couple of clousers, got it rigged up and went to the beach and just kind of self-taught. Just started, um, caught a bass or two to begin with, then started fishing for the fluke. And my daughters were raised on fried fluke and French fries, and I kept it coming. I would always go there, make sure that they had plenty in the freezer, and that's how I started.
Great. We were talking earlier, and we said to you, how many people go out and buy a fly rod setup for fluke?
And I said one.
I was going to say that is an exotic species on fly for most
Yeah,
people.
It really is. So,
anything's possible.
so, you know, the question that a lot of people really want to know is we'll get to your influence in fly tying in a bit, but how did you come up with SF blend? What in the world possessed you to do that?
Well, once I moved on from fluke, I would fish nights, and I would fish off the beach in Point Pleasant, then intermediate line, and I would look for bluefish or stripers, whatever would bite, weak fish, and I would use um, some of the flash available at that time. A lot of it was angel hair, which caught my eye. And like everyone else, I would make a small streamer with an epoxy head and just the angel hair. And I would go fish with that. And I'd notice after an hour or so that I was fishing just an epoxy head with no flash on it. It was so brittle it would break off. So I said, I've got to kick up the durability in this. And I started experimenting with different fibers. The Bozo hair, unique, well, unique hair wasn't out at that time, but ultra hair, super hair, big fly fiber. I tried everything. And I ended up liking the two more than others. The super hair I liked, and I liked the kinky fiber at the time, which turned into slinky fiber. So I started blending that, And since I was when I first started, I would blend more heavily with the flash, and then I would less flash, less flash, less flash until I got just the mixture I wanted. At that time, it was a ratio about three of the fiber to one of the flash, and I even took it back from that. So that's how I came upon it, and I liked it. I would use that for the wider, larger, puffed out patterns, and I'd use the unique hair with angel hair for more of the spearing sand eel type patterns.
Wow, I think probably next to you, you have a couple of examples of that, don't you?
Oh, sure, sure. Here's one that is a derivative of Bob. This, let's see. Oh, I got to turn the camera on, don't I?
Steve has his special fly cam.
You know what? We'll turn off our cameras here so
Yeah.
we can see what Steve puts
There we
on.
go. Okay, that one's already in the vise. So that's a fly that I call the MV baitfish. Everybody see that?
Yeah, you can see it
Okay.
well.
MV, and what is that? Martha's Vineyard baitfish?
Martha's Vineyard, because that's where I started experimenting with that type of tie. I had done
Oh,
it for a number of years and kind of finalized it up there.
that's great. Did you get to finalize it with anyone up there that we may all know?
Oh, sure, sure. Bob Popovics, he was the one that started getting me to go up there. We had a group of maybe 5 to 6 guys, and we'd go up once a year for a week. And we started, well, they started way before I did, but I joined them in the, I guess, early 2000s. So it was just a pleasure, great times, a lot of fishing. We'd always look for a place that had 2 dining room tables or a big kitchen table and a dining room table, and one would just be allocated for tying, so you'd never have to put your stuff away.
Hmm.
So that's all we did was tie
And
and fish.
it looks like you have there's a grizzly hackle in the middle of that, it looks like.
There is.
And
Yep.
we talked a little bit about this before we started the Zoom, but I'm curious, like, what got you tying predominantly with synthetics versus with natural materials? I mean, you were doing that, I think, before a lot of people were constructing flies mainly with synthetics. And what made you sort of turn to synthetics, and what was the advantage you saw of that?
Well, the advantage was I didn't have to find good bucktail. That was
Mhm.
basically the main thing. I could easily find any synthetic or create any synthetic I wanted, but to find a quality bucktail was a lot more work back in those days. And being fairly new at the tying, I wasn't plugged in, so I didn't know where the good supply was. I didn't know Brad Buzzy at that time. I didn't know some of the other guys at that time. So I just gravitated to the synthetics, and there were so many different types between the bozo hair and the unique hair and super hair. You could just go on, and everyone had a use. It's just a matter of how you used it. And for blending, it was just a matter of how you blended it and what you blended it with. You had to make sure the flash matched the density of the fiber.
When you blended, were you using anything mechanical or was this all by hand?
Oh no, all by hand. I started like everybody else, where you'd blend it at each tying step. So you just take a little bit and rotate it through your hands, or strip it, strip until it looked decent to you. And most times it didn't. The flash would stand out more than I would like to see it. Um, so what I started doing was, instead of blending at each step, I started blending entire packs of flash and fiber, and that's what started the idea of the blend. Why not why not blend it all up front and then package it? And at that time, we had the long fly sleeves were available, and I would just roll it up, and I would do the blending. Well, let me explain how I would blend it. I would do it in layers. So I would take out the fiber. I'd lay it in maybe a 9 by 12 rectangle on a table, and just make a very thin layer. and then I would take the flash and add a thin layer over it, and then back to the fiber, another thin layer. And then I would alternate until I was done with both materials. I would roll it up just like a cigar, hold it in my hand, and then strip it back out again in thin layers. And the more times you repeated that process, um, the more both the fiber and the flash blended into each other. And that's what started.
Wow, that's really interesting. Now, when you started blending, did Bob have an influence in how you did this? Was he like Steve, a little more of this, a little more of that, or was this all you pretty much?
No, it was all me. What Bob had a big influence was is he bugged the hell out of me for 2 years to document it, to write an article on it. And he was relentless because I was just, I'm just new at tying. I'm not selling anything. I'm doing a couple of demos. I'm teaching a class at the Atlantic Saltwater Fly Rodders, but other than that, no big deal. But he would say, you got to document it. You got to write an article. And thanks to him, I did, and it caught on, and anybody that saw it liked it, and I got good feedback on it.
Hey,
Wow,
Steve,
that's
why don't you
cool.
come back on camera now that we've been able to look at
Sure.
that beautiful fly?
And there's another fly I want you to talk about because you know you used to fish for them, but your flounder fly really just is just incredible to look at, and
I,
I've known that fly for years, and to actually see the person who tied it just and
you're gonna
hold
like you're gonna like the story on this one.
Do you catch
yes.
fluke with the flounder fly?
You're gonna wait for the story.
I cannot wait.
All right, I suspect we're gonna have to go back off camera in a second here.
We might have to, but yeah. But this fly, everybody, when you guys get to see this fly, it's just incredible how lifelike it is, and the blending of the colors, the way Steve does it, is just incredible.
I'm almost embarrassed to tell you the story on this one.
Well, that makes the story even better.
Here we
There it
go.
is.
Wow,
Oh, what a
incredible.
fly!
That's amazing. It's so cool.
And note that it's a jig hook. It's not a straight hook, which is really fascinating.
I'll tell you, the jig hook is, I got to blame Henry for that. Thanks to him. That's why I got that hook.
There you go, Henry. You got the shout out you needed tonight.
Henry, you got to blame something on Steve on your show.
So this fly originated simply because I was up at the vineyard. I would run into Dave Skoke, who was friends with Bob, um, a couple of the guys up there, uh, and we decided to hook up and fish for bass on estuaries where the flounder would the young of the year would pour out. According to Dave, I've never seen it. So we said, okay, let's set it next spring or whenever the time was. We'll do it. We'll get together. And that got me thinking. Was said, well, I don't have a baby flounder fly. What am I going to do?
Mm,
So it took a while, and I had been fishing. I had been fishing similar flies, crab patterns, merkin type patterns for striped bass and for the cow nose rays back at that time.
mm,
And you could envision putting a tail on that, and all of a sudden you've got a flounder, from a crabby looking fly. And all it was a high tie, but just done side to side instead of top to bottom.
mm, mm.
Mm,
And
So that's
it's
just
tied.
hanks of flash that are tied high tie, low tie, but basically laterally instead of vertically.
Yes. Yep.
Mhm.
And what
and,
I would do
and
with
there's
it,
epoxy. There's black epoxy on the bottom to hold the molded
yeah, on the
piece.
bottom, what I did instead of using, I started with the lead dumbbell eyes, and I just didn't like the looks of it. So what I started using was tungsten powder
Mm,
mixed with epoxy. And after you tied the fly, you could simply just drop it on there as long as the fly was level, and it would self-level and kind of soak into the fabric, and it gave it a lot of nice weight with very little amount of epoxy and a lesser amount of tungsten. So that's what I settled on for that. The structure of the fly was simply one color, white, and then you'd use a brown pen to draw the outline. You just wouldn't take it all the way, so it would give the illusion of fins. Plop a couple of eyes on there, give some plastic dip to the threads, and you were done. That was it. But the trip never came off, so I had all these flounder flies and nowhere to use them. Turned out, turned out I've never fished them other than other than fishing one at Sandy Hook when I took the video to document the pattern. That's the only time I've actually used them. I've never had occasion to use it. It was made for sight fishing, and I've just never done it. So unfortunately, I've never caught anything on it, and I've never fished it. So there you go. How's that for a plug?
That's
Well, I
that's
would eat it.
yeah, I would definitely with French fries. Uh, so, let me kind of go off fly topic for a minute. Let's all get back on camera.
All right.
So, the other question a lot of people want to know is tell us a little bit about Bob and your first meeting with him and you know, we don't want to wax too poetic and we all miss him, but you know, fill us in on what happened with you guys and how it all began.
Sure, sure. I had been one of the best customers for the fly hatch there for a number of years, and my tying got better and better. They had I would spend some lunch times there, and they had a flying table and all the tools and all the materials you could possibly want to use. And as I got better with both the tying and the fishing, I had talked to some of the guys in the shop about, hey, I'm a loner. I just fish by myself, days, nights. I'm not really fishing with anybody at all. Where can I go to, meet self-minded people, share some of what I knew, and I knew that I had a lot more to learn. So one of my buddies now, a good buddy, Dick Dennis, worked in the fly hatch at that time, and he was the boat guide for the shop. And he and Dave Chenard, the owner, both directed me to a couple of different clubs. And Dick said, you really need to join the Atlantic Saltwater Fly Rodders. So I took his advice, told me when the meeting was for the next month. I went down there, and that's a club for folks that don't know that Bob started. Matter of fact, he started it in his house before the club was actually formed. So that was before my time. So when I joined, the club was meeting in Seaside Park, but not at his house. And that's where I met him, and we hit it off immediately. And we wouldn't fish much together, but boy, we'd spend all our time tying and documenting, videotaping or documenting the flies that we were designing and using. He had a great in his tying room. He had a beautiful setup. Somebody had given him a Mac computer way back when, and he got a video camera, and he was really talented at putting videos together and doing the editing. So we would spend a lot of time in his room doing patterns for teaching at the club, and we would put it on the club website. It's still there. The URL is aswf.org, and there are probably, I don't know, 20, 30 patterns of Bob's, mine, and others that are documented quite well, very thoroughly. And there's also he was excellent at getting guys prepared for fishing the beach. What would you need? When should you go? Where should you go? All the details that one would need to start. How do you rig lines? How do you tie knots? And I think everything is still on there. I haven't been on there in quite a while. But for those that are just learning, check out that site, www.aswf.org, and look for the section under educational materials, and that's what you'll find. So that's how I met him, and we hit it off, and spent an awful lot of time in his room doing that. Um, I would I was lucky enough when he did some of his newer innovative patterns, the flex fly. The last one I did with him was the beast fly, where I would video him and put it on YouTube. Um, um, with the club, we had everything on the club site. When YouTube became more and more popular, we would put some of the videos on YouTube and then just point to them from the club site. So
Wow.
that's how it started.
Yeah,
Well,
I just put the URL in the chat for everyone, and we'll put
Great.
it when we record this to YouTube. We'll publish it to YouTube. We'll put the link in there as
yeah.
well.
So tell us about, because I know you're a beach fishing guy, and as we discussed once a while back, I asked you why you didn't fish from a boat, and you were like, "That's easy." So let's, because you were fishing from the beach. But how about take us back to an evening where maybe you and Bob were on the beach? You know,
Well, let's see. That was rare in the evening. Night times it was usually I was usually by myself up at Sandy Hook.
right?
Most of our fishing was during the day, and I actually enjoyed fishing during the day much more than evenings. You'd catch a few less
Yeah,
bass, but the visual portion of it was so much more intense during the day that I would say I
absolutely.
fish days more often than not, rather than nights.
Yeah, I personally I couldn't agree with you more being a guide. Um, Eric, do you have a question for Steve?
Well, I'm actually going to invoke, first of all, I should reintroduce myself. David, as you and Luann both know, it's been way too long since I was able to join you here on Masters of the Fly. But my name's Eric Schatzker, everybody. I'm delighted to be back. Uh, Missed everyone here dearly. Steve, Alex Early on the audience Q&A poses a question that we hear quite often here on Masters of the Fly, which is if you're out in the salt, and I think we're talking about the Northeast here because there's a lot of salt in a lot of places. Um, what's the one fly you would bring with you?
Um, the first one that was in the vise,
Right, the MV fly, huh?
the MV fly, the MV baitfish. And if it's
Just
during the
just because
fall
it's
run,
it's such an effective imitation of so many different things.
easy to tie, catches just fine, don't need eyes on it. Um, it
That's a
just
plus.
yeah, yeah,
You want to
just
hold that
fits the
up again,
criteria.
Steve, for us so
Sure.
we
Yeah,
can see it?
yeah, just hold, you don't need to put it on camera. You can just hold it right in
Oh,
front
just
of you.
hold it there. Okay. There
Sure.
we go.
Look at that. I mean, it looks, looks great. That's a great view of it, actually, straight ahead. It's so round.
Yeah.
So I would use that as a good searching pattern, and my go-to pattern. If it was the fall run in the beginning when the bass used to eat the mullet, now the mullet go by and nothing eats them.
Mm.
But I would use any kind of mullet fly, and that might be a fly with a slightly broader head,
Hmm.
something
Oh
like
yeah.
that. So
So,
yeah.
Steve, we have two
Sure.
questions here about Plastidip. Um, Durbin Wells, whom it seems to me, based on the nature of the question, knows you,
Yes.
says, "When did your love affair with Plastidip begin? I sat with you, blended fibers, tied those flounder flies, but never got the hang of working with the stuff after that." And Ken Eklund, whom we talked about very early in this conversation, still wants to know if you're still using it. So maybe a little bit of background on Plastidip as a substance. Why do you find it useful? Do you still use it? And why does it appear that some people find it frustrating?
Sure. Sure. Well, first of all, I don't use it anymore because I don't tie anymore. I haven't tied in 5 or 6 years. Um, but if I were to tie, I'd continue to use it. I was introduced to it by Brad Buzzy, who most folks know.
And who's on here who says hello, by the way?
Hey,
Yeah,
Brad. Hey,
there he
Brad.
is. Yeah.
Brad gave me a bottle out of the blue at the club, one of the ASWF club meetings, and he said, "Steve, here you go. Try this. I don't know what it's good for, but you may find out." So it sat on my tying desk for a couple of years, and I finally gave it a go. I was using, the usual epoxy, the different types of glue that was around. And when I opened this one up, there was something similar to it. It smelled the same anyway, um, but was thinner. You guys may know. Help me out with the. It was like a plastic dip, smelled like plastic dip, but it was much thinner from a guy in California. Very thin, but it was a glue.
Yeah.
I tried that. I didn't like it. It was too drippy.
Was
Softex?
it Softex?
Soft-Tex, that was
Yeah,
it. Yes,
Brad
thank you.
put it in there. Thanks, Brad. And
Thank
I
you.
was thinking
Yep,
Softex
yep.
too. Yep,
And I
yep.
would use it would just, it would just drip out of the fly too much and it would smell just as bad as plastic.
I remember it well.
But the plastic dip, when you first open it, it was much thicker. So if you took a bodkin and dipped it on the eyes in between, it sucker would just stay there. It wouldn't drip at all. It would cure nice. Um, I took my time, read all the warnings about it, which there were tons of. If you looked at the technical sheets on what was in it and what problems it could cause, to me, it set off a red flag and say, okay, you use this. You don't use it with a bodkin. You don't open up the can and dip into it every 2 minutes. You got to find a different way. Oh, and I'll show you how I use it.
Can't wait for this.
But what I did was I found different ways of injecting it. So at first I started with some plastic disposable syringes where you could suck it up and then inject it into the fly. And after a while, I finally found these. They're coated. The inside of the bottle is coated with something that prevents all the bad stuff from exiting the bottle. Normally, it would just soak through the plastic and you'd get the fumes. But this, for instance, the bottle's full. I filled this up over a year ago. Had one of my buddies come over for some tips on tying, and filled it up at that time, and it's still completely usable, which is
Wow.
surprising. But I would use two bottles. I would use one bottle of the straight plastic dip, and I would use one bottle that was thinned out. The bottle that was straight, I would use for coating the eyes, and I would actually show you with the fly here. At that time, I was tying a lot of the peanut bunker patterns. So I would
Wow.
I'll point it with a pen here. I would take the injector or that bottle and insert the plastic dip right between the eyes, right up front. You can see the eyes are very much forward on this by design. And I would coat, all the way back to the back of the eye until it would actually squeeze out. You could see it squeezing out in the pattern over the eye. Then it would come up and I would coat the outside of the eye as well, so that those eyes were completely encased in the plastic dip.
Hmm.
This fly, by the way, is over 20 years old, so
Wow.
it doesn't deteriorate, it doesn't yellow, it stays flexible, and it adds just a touch of weight to the pattern too, which you can use to advantage especially for casting a larger, bulkier pattern.
I'm
Then I would take the thinned out version and I would inject it onto the shank of the hook. One thing I would do when I would tie is I would never use any glue um, for the entire tying of the fly. When I was finished, I'd do the eyes and then I'd use the thinned out plastic dip to come inside the eye and coat the wraps. And over time, what I would do is squeeze the bottle and coat to just behind the bend, just randomly, just a little drop, 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 drop here and here. And that I found would be great for foul-proofing the fly, and plus helping to maintain the shaft. This one doesn't have anything in it because it's an early fly. Um,
Yeah, that's a
so that
beautiful.
was it. It was Brad Buzzy. Gave me a bottle, didn't know what to use it for, and I didn't either for a couple of years. But ever since I started using it, I wouldn't go back to anything else. Now, I spend more time, just as much time tying flies as I do warning people not to use it around kids or women, women and children out of the room. I would advise them to take the fly out of the vise as soon as you coated it, walk it into the garage and let it cure away from any human.
That's
So
Okay,
probably a good
you
tip.
have to use
Yep.
it carefully.
Brad
Henry,
just posted that the bottles are fluorinated, and
Yes, they
Wapsi
are
silver bottles.
fluorinated.
All right,
Yes.
fluorinated. Yep.
Henry just
Uh,
asked a question to everybody on here, so I'm going to read it to you. What's your favorite color of angel hair to use when blending? Um, you know, for fishes, albie stripers, weak fish. Is there any one particular color that stands out to you that
Yeah,
you
light brown, white, and pink are my three favorites. Matter of fact, let's see. I got You asked me to pull out a couple of packs to show folks, and those are the three packs I picked out: light brown, pink, and off-white.
that
Light
that
brown is
looks
mullet brown.
yeah, that looks pretty much like my entire fly box for the fall.
But yeah, but that's what I like.
and that's just based on your own experience as to what catches fish.
I size and profile rule, eyes and color are nice. That's about the way I look at it.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I'm not big on the colors, and that's probably because fishing Sandy Hook. It's not the clearest of water, at least back when I was fishing.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure the color was as important as the size and the profile.
Yeah.
So,
Well, if it's any
when,
consolation, the color hasn't gotten any better around Sandy Hook.
so when you started experimenting with fly designs, I know there's a lot of trial and error. Where what what took you in the direction you went? What was your sort of trial and error period for
Oh, um, it was holding the bait in the area, making sure that I was able to, get a spearing, get a bait, a small bunker, try to get a mullet, hold it in your hand, look at it, watch how they acted in the surf when when the bass or the bluefish were feeding on them, and try and imitate that. So that was the driver, trying to match the local baits. Then came things like the exaggerated size of the head to push water a little bit more. But that was after trying to imitate. Then it was trying to imitate plugs. Some of the things the surf guys were fishing with. Yeah,
Hmm.
no fish really looks too much like that, but a lot of plugs do. So
right? Is that with a silicone head?
no,
Okay,
this is just the blend.
it's just the blend. Wow.
Yeah, yeah, that's just all.
And it just gave you with those big heads, it gave you a lot of action to the tail of the fly, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly.
Really.
Someone asked, I think it was Tom Fuda was asking about liquid fusion because you mentioned the other adhesives that you use. I know that Johnny King swears by liquid fusion and also feels that it's a little less toxic. Have you
Oh,
played
it's
with
much
that at
less
all?
toxic.
Hmm.
Yeah, much less. And once Johnny started using it, he had told me about it, so I bought some and tried it, and it was a little too drippy for the way I was using it.
Hmm.
I still have a bottle in the closet, but I went right back to the plastic dip just my own preference.
Have you experimented with any of the blue light acrylics?
Yes, they're in a closet too.
You
The
don't, you
plastic
don't,
dip was just
Steve's,
the plastic
you
dip
don't,
was just too easy.
Yeah.
you don't like any of the UV resin at all.
I don't. No, I don't. I'll show you. Let's see. There's a couple of. Usually use that for something like a surf candy.
Right?
Right.
And this is a plastic dip coated. It's over Blaine's silly skin.
Right.
So I've been using just silly skin and Blaine stuff, and that it was just easier for me to coat it that way rather than using a an acrylic.
Hmm.
I also
Well,
didn't like the smell. The smell, plastic dip stinks, but I take it out and put it in the garage. But the acrylic, you're working right over it with the light, and I didn't enjoy the smell of it.
smells like mildew.
Yeah, it's just a different smell. And I,
Yeah.
I was when Bob was experimenting with it in the beginning, and oh, he spent endless hours with a Dr. Ned somebody out in I think Texas, a dentist. He was the one
Right.
that uh, I guess the inventor of it,
Mhm.
and Bob was the tester. And Bob would spend endless hours on it. I remember up at the vineyard, we spent more time, making sure it didn't crack, it didn't yellow. He'd have nightmares about bubbles forming inside of it. So he was so meticulous about getting it. He had to make sure he was a big safety guy. Had to make sure it was safe. So he never used a plastic tip, that's for sure.
Mhm.
But he did. He made sure it was safe. He made sure it was effective. He made sure it didn't yellow because he always had a problem with the epoxy after
Yep.
time
Yellowing.
yellow.
Yep.
So you jump into his van when he was testing this, you wouldn't want to jump in because the front seat had about 50 flies sitting there in the sun all the time, just so he could see whether they yellow or
Oh,
not.
interesting.
Oh,
That's
really?
fascinating.
And
Mm.
you with the flounder fly, we talked about the fact that you were using a jig hook, but with most of your time, which hooks do you tend to gravitate to?
I like a good keel on a hook. So I would use the Varivas were nice. The Mustad tarpon hooks were nice. Um, some of the Tiemco, I enjoyed using them. So it all depended. If it had a good keel, I would use it. If I could, I stayed away from a lot of the black plastic, black nickel early in the day. But I later on I used more and more of them. They had nice sharp hooks and were a little bit lighter than I would have liked. But I think they've since come out with heavier metal hooks. So
Yeah,
keel, it had a nice keel.
that's
Steve, I
that's
didn't have a chance to run down uh, to my um, collection of crazy quilt collection of materials today to look on the back of my SF blend, but I recall that, um, if I'm not mistaken, it's manufactured in South Africa. Is that right?
It is a company by the name of Fishient manufactures it.
That and they do polar fiber as well, right? And
They
some
have
other stuff.
they must have, I don't know, I would say 20, maybe 20 different products.
So I don't know
Renzetti
if
is a
this
is, Renzetti is a distributor
Mm.
that works closely with them, I know.
Mm. Mhm.
this might come as a bit of a left field question for you, but maybe it gives people a bit of an indication of how my brain is working these days. Um, have you given thought, particularly in recent days, to sort of the global supply chain for all this stuff, um, and whether it'll continue to be as these materials will, particularly those manufactured in far off places, will continue to be as accessible to us, um, with the threat of things like tariffs very present at the moment.
No, not in the least. No
You
concern
haven't thought
at
about
all.
it.
No, no, no concern at all.
That was the quick answer. Um,
But fly
and
tires are, so inventive. They will find a way. As long as people are selling wigs, there's not going to be a lack of this kind of material.
that's right. Well,
Uh,
we'd hate to have a tax on hair extensions. Um, you know, you know, I remember a few years ago when all the hairdressers in New York City were using feathers, and it was really hard for fly tires to get some really good saddles
Yes,
about a year,
yes,
but that changed quickly.
yeah.
Um, when
that's a very good point, by the way, about creativity. The people adjust, right?
Oh, yeah, yep.
Uh, and if you've got an imperative, which is I must catch fish, you'll find a way.
Yeah. Problems are there to be solved.
so
That's
you
the
know
engineer.
you were videotaping Bob when he was coming up with the beast fly. And it's such a fascinating fly, all the different sections and how you come up with it. And I have a feeling you have something similar to that with SF Blend sitting next to you on the table. And and I would really like to see that and have a discussion about it.
Let's see.
Maybe we'll switch to your Vice. If you want to put it in the Vice, we'll go cameras off here to highlight it.
Yeah, let's see.
But there was also a really interesting question, you know, somebody wanted to know instead of tying a beast fly, yes,
Ooh.
how can you tie a really long fly
Hmm.
without having multiple sections? And there it is, right
There
there.
it is. You want to put that in the Vice, Steve, and we'll
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Steve,
switch
how
cameras.
long would you say that fly is?
Let's say it's 10 inches.
Yeah,
Wow. Well, we're
amazing.
about to go to Vice Cam right now. I mean, that's a
Wow.
beautiful
Yeah.
thing. And how many feathers do you have tied to the center of that fly?
Let's see. It's not many. Let's see. It looks like there's three in this one.
Wow. I bet it
You
gives
don't
it.
need you don't need many. Some
Yeah.
I would do flat wing, some I would do Semper
Hmm.
Ah,
from Bob Semper fly. He would tie maybe 5 to 7 fibers around the shank at the end. This one looks like it might be flat wing, just three, one on top of the other.
yeah.
Hmm.
Well, it's beautiful. I bet the movement in the water is just terrific with that. And the great thing about SF blend is when you're casting it, the water comes out so nicely on the first haul, you
Oh,
know?
it does. It does. Matter of fact, I'm glad you mentioned that because that's another thing I was concerned about when I was looking for the right fibers. Some of the fibers would act like a sponge and would get so heavy that you'd be casting, parts of a mop almost. So I was really interested in making sure that whatever I used was shedding water.
Can you just talk about, Steve, how that's tied? So you've got those the feathers in there tied in there. And then how do you build the body around that with the
Yeah,
SF blend?
usually let's see if I can get a pen here and illustrate it over here. Let's see. What I would do is first I would start right at the rear of the hook and I would tie I would tie side side a high tie. I would take the synthetic and I would attach it, roughly in the middle and then fold it over.
Mhm.
And most of the synthetics I've tied that way. It's always got an attach point and then folded over so it resists to being pulled out or loosened.
Mhm.
Um, but I would build a place for the hackle to sit in between. Um, what do they call that with some of Ken Abrams flies? Pillow.
Right, like a
I
pillow,
would do it.
right?
But I would create a synthetic like pillow or a
Interesting.
synthetic like crevice so that if I was doing a flat wing type of effect, it would have a place to nestle. And then I would just build up high ties around it, depending upon the type of imitation I was trying to do, and then move forward a little bit, do the same thing again, side, side, top, bottom, move forward, side, side, top, bottom. And then as I got to the head, I would want a bulkier head. So up here, I would start to do side, top, bottom, and a kind of a modified hollow tie where you tie in, might have a length about like that, attach it right where my finger is, have more of it hanging out over the front of it,
Mm.
and then just push it back. And that in itself would be a synthetic collar. So
Mm.
and you could pile them on one after the other. I'd use a very fine mono. So there's absolutely no buildup. And you could just one after the other. And you
So
could
you're
just,
doing that hollow fly style where you're tying it forward and then pushing it back to get that bulk.
yeah, except if you took a look at if you did an extended hollow, where you're attaching the bucktail in the middle, which you don't do, but just envision that. That would be more like it. But you could really blow out the head, make the head very wide, make it very round, very pronounced. And it was easy. It's very simple to do.
Yeah.
Mm.
There's no
I,
there's
two
much less
questions.
talent involved in it.
Yeah,
Mm.
two
Put it that way.
questions. Two questions. One, um, is sort of a pressing question is eyes versus no eyes. And the second question, more specifically about this fly, how many different sections did it take before you finished the fly, as far as feathers and material? How many times are you tying in before you're finished?
Oh, on this fly, if I had to guess, a dozen to 20 ties, I would say.
Wow. And I noticed some of your flies have eyes and some don't. I know from my experience, maybe I'm lazy. I rarely put eyes on my flies, but how do you feel about that?
I'm not a fan of eyes. I could do and do many times do without them. If it's a tie that I just want to look good, I'll put an eye on it. If it's a tie I just want to fish good, I'll leave the eyes off.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I
And
was.
now, let me qualify that. Let me qualify that by saying for certain patterns, like a peanut bunker,
Yes.
those eyes are an integral part of the design. I want that weight. I want that weight up there. I want
Mm.
that mass
Mhm.
of rubber cement in there. So for those, it's required because it's part of the design.
Interesting.
For others, like the one in the vise, like some of my go-to flies, really don't need it at all.
Mm.
I just
Right.
because I try both. I would experiment. I do one day with eyes, one day without eyes, one day with eyes, and it really didn't make a difference.
Mm.
Wow.
Now, again, I'm fishing Sandy Hook. I got to qualify that. If I was
Well,
down clear waters of the Bahama, I might think differently about it. Yeah.
I mean, I always know from my personal experience, and Lou can speak for himself, that I just figure when I'm stripping a fly in, the fish is chasing it from behind. He's never going to see the
Mhm.
eyes anyway, so why have them there?
I do put a butthole on my flies.
Didn't see that
There you
coming.
go. You see it going.
That's right.
Yeah, we had the same discussion. It's interesting. We had this exact same discussion with Johnny, and with Bob. And one of the things I think Bob was talking about was, when you've got like a big bunker and you're trying to tie a fly that is, you know, where the fish is going to attack it head on, then the eyes are a little more important potentially. But he tended to think that the eyes were not as important as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a tough stretch for him too, because his whole idea of the flies, Fleys, is because
Right.
it's got the eye
The
in
eye.
it.
Right.
Same
That's
with
right.
Lefty. Lefty was a big eye fan, so it's hard to go against that.
It really is. Really, I mean, you know, you're out there fishing a fly and it bangs off something, and there you go, you got the one-eye fly. And people like me who could be OCD about the flies, I can't stand asymmetry. So I'll have to throw that fly out and pick up another one. But
Now, for some reason, I'll never talk, there's no reason that's got to have an eye on it. But that type of fly, I'll always put eyes on it.
yeah,
I don't know. Can't explain it.
Steve, there were a couple questions here from folks about
Yeah.
sort of your actual creation of SF Blend, and I think we'd be really interested in hearing sort of how did you go from hand blending to actually developing a product, and what was that sort of journey like, and what was entailed and being able to produce SF Blend at a high quality in high volume, high quality, and also other folks were asking, yeah, just about how you went about mass producing in a way that you were able to put your brand behind it.
Sure, sure. Well, once I started using it at the clubs and demonstrating it at different fly shops, it caught on, and folks wanted to know more and more about it. There was this one shop, to remain unknown, that said, "Hey, we should really start to produce this in some fashion." And I said, "No, I don't mind. No big deal for me. Either way is good." So we talked about it and said, if you're going to be producing it and it's going to have my name on it, I want a little bit of the action, not greedy, not looking to retire on it, and just looking to do what's fair. So I made up a bunch of samples. I made 2 boxes of samples, and we had further discussions. There were a couple of folks involved, and we couldn't agree on who was gonna pay what for compensation over time. And I said, okay, look, if you can't agree, then I don't have to go forward with this. I don't want to bother. So we just let it set. So lo and behold, about 6 months later, the blend is available and out with my name on it. And said, let me go talk to this person, find out what's going on. And sure enough, I just went ahead and did it anyway, and hooked up with Fishient. I said, okay, let's see what happens. Let it roll. So I let it roll for about a year. And then I started calling around to see who was going to pay some minimal royalty for the product. And it's amazing how many people just took a step back. Uh, and the folks at Fishient, have to give them credit. Said, okay, we'll do an agreement. So we haggled back and forth, agreed on a method and an amount, and basically what I did was every year and a half, I would come knocking and say, okay, how many did you sell? What's the portion? How do we arrange payment? And there was a problem there because they couldn't get. It was tough to get money out of South Africa, so they had to arrange it so it wasn't a royalty on a per package basis, although that's how it's calculated. They had to come up with an amount, and let me know what that amount was, and then I would have to write an invoice to them for attending shows or whatever, doing demonstrations to come up with that amount, and then they would deposit a check in an account to me at a future date. So it worked like that for a number of years, and it was fine by me. It worked out well. It would pay for, Martha's Vineyard trip here and there, or trip to Florida. So I was happy with it, and then the quality was good. It was started out with 13 colors, and then I think they must have 50 or 60 colors by now.
I know my favorite new color is purple.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I don't go to Mexico without it now.
But to tell you the truth, I haven't talked with them in years. I haven't had a dime in 5 or 6 years. So
Wow.
they're just freewheeling it. And
Hmm.
it's you know what's important is it's out there. People like it. They're using it. And I never sold a thing. I never even sold my old blend.
Hmm.
Never sold a pack of it. Funny story on that. I got a call from Lefty out of the blue years ago. And it was 5 minutes of some of Lefty jokes and introduce him, say, hey, Lefty, hi, Steve, yeah, I'm Lefty. So I know who you are. And he would say, I really wanted, sir, he had his mindset on certain colors for a trip he was going to take with Klauser. And he said, but I want to, here are the colors I want, here are the number of packs I want. I want you to send them to me, and I want to make sure that you send me a bill. And of course, Lefty, you don't want to send Lefty a bill. And he was quite adamant. So I agreed with him. I said, "Okay, Lefty, I'll charge you what I paid for it." And I sent him to him free because that's what I paid for it because I had a pretty good stockpile. And he was nice enough. He sent me a couple letters, a nice book, and we stayed in touch for a bit there. And he became a fan of it, and it was good memories.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's great.
Now, Bob, I would use I would make special blends for Bob because he was more into using it for small mullets for his surf candies and especially want to use it for the flex flies that he was doing. Um, so I would make blends with angel hair and super hair and unique hair for him, and that's what he used.
Oh, that's great.
Mhm.
Well, we could keep talking, but I think this has just been such a wonderful evening. And, I can't thank you enough for attending. That phone call I made to you a couple of months ago, and no sooner could I get the words Bob out of my mouth than you said yes. And
Yeah,
uh,
definitely.
you know,
Only one Bob.
that's right. And Steve, having you on the show has been terrific because so many of us rely on SF Blend for pretty much most of our flies these days. It's really replaced a lot of stuff. The fact that it sheds water so well, the way it sparkles, and the way it handles is so wonderful. And and it's really a tribute to you and what you've done and your observations on fly fishing, and maybe the fact that you came to it later gave you a certain advantage over the rest of us who started so early in life. So thank you
Yeah,
very
starting early. If I had to do it over again, I would have started when I was 5 years old. By the way, there's an article on aswf.org that shows folks how to, what steps to go through to make their own version of the blend. There's the Horsleys put out a video on YouTube that also does the same thing, I think maybe in the Renzetti area. But it's pretty easy to do. It's just tedious. So for those that want to experiment with it, it's a very easy process. And you can experiment with different types of flash and fiber.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey
I
Steve, maybe to take us out, given that we're sort of doing this as David was alluding to, doing the season of Masters of the Fly as sort of a tribute to Bob, and what he means. He's meant so much to all of us who are in the saltwater fly fishing, fly tying world. And you've told us some wonderful stories about him, but maybe just a word about the significance of his contribution was to this sport that we all love.
I would say, well, a couple of ideas there. One, by the way, is if you want to see it, I have a video that's maybe 5 or 6 minutes
Hmm.
of Bob doing his acceptance speech at the Fly Fishing Hall of Fame
hmm,
Hmm.
that I took for him and gave to him so he could show to Alexis, his wife, and share it with others. I could show you that if you wanted.
Hmm.
Uh, I could let me add though that there's a combination there of sharing, of kindness, of generally a very good human spirit that you just don't find everywhere. Matter of fact, sometimes you don't find it anywhere.
Mm,
That was Bob.
mm. I
Mm.
love that. I
So do
love
I.
that. And maybe what we'll do is, Steve, if you want, maybe what we'll do is when we post this video to YouTube, we'll sort of put that 5-minute video
Whatever you like. Yep,
at the
whatever
end
you
Yeah,
of
like.
it, so
connect it with this
everyone can
show.
refer to
Yeah,
it. But I love that, and thank you for your words, and thank you for tonight. I think it's really an incredible contribution that you've made to fly fishing and fly tying.
I appreciate that. I just hope everybody has fun with it. That's the idea.
absolutely.
Share it.
Here,
We'll
here.
share
And that's what we're all about. We'll be sharing this. And again, Steve, thank you so much for coming on tonight. We can't thank you enough. I speak for me, Eric, and Lu Yen.
Yeah,
it.
for
Guys, thank you
sure.
very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you all, and thank you to everybody for joining us tonight. And we look forward to seeing you on February 26th with Captain Henry Cowan.
Oh,
By the
yeah.
way, Henry, thanks for the help in the beginning.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone. Thank
Good
you.
night.
Say some words. Oh. Well, first of all, I just want to thank my many friends that have helped all these years along the way. I want you to get some pictures there. Which there are many, but there's a few that I would like to take the time to mention. One was a name that you don't hear very often, these days especially, that it's been so much later. His name is Fred Schreier. He lived in Toms River, and he was the man who put together the Saltwater Fly Rodders of America, which ended up holding the world records for saltwater fly fishing for many, many years until given up to the IGFA a few years back. He was very instrumental in my development because he gave me the terrific insight into what was saltwater fly fishing, what was fly fishing, how vast the community was, and how it really could grow so much, especially in saltwater. But he's often overlooked, so I'd like to make a mention of him at this point. Other guys is, of course, you have your friends along the way, and Ed Jaworowski, to me, was always my mentor for many, many years. And of course, I had the opportunity to teach many people either casting or fly tying or whatever. But one thing I always think about with Ed is every time I would find myself teaching somebody either about casting or tying, somehow I seemed like I was repeating what Ed had already taught me. So to that, I'm eternally grateful. Also, excuse me, my best friend, Lance Irwin, who has been through all of this with me. He was the first guy to tell me, he says, you know, this surf candy fly of yours, man, you got something here. Came in my house, he said, I just got 25 bluefish on this fly. And he said, look at it, it's still good. And he threw it onto my table. And I said, okay, man, this is good. All right, we'll go with it. It was all scratched up, but I had some nail polish there that I would clean it right back up, and it was great. So I remember that day very vividly, but we've done everything together over the years to the point to where we're almost, our instincts coincide, where when I would video him, I knew when I needed to have him move to the left and I can get into position with the camera. It was done almost instinctively. That's how close that we are. And we've gone all over the world together, fishing and all that. And one thing I told my wife in the very beginning, I said, we're gonna, I have to make a commitment to being, playing this a little bit more professionally, and that would take away from my business. And I said to her, if you allow me to do that, I will. And of course she did. And I said the one thing I wanted to do was to take my friends, as many as I could, along that road with me. And I think we were able to do that. And of course, Not without saying, the most important person in my life is my wife for 43 years. I think I got that right. And because she's home at the restaurant now working while I'm up here doing this. So I get all the pats on the back, but believe me, she gets my biggest pat on her back when I get home. Believe me, she's a rock. She sacrificed so much for me to be able to do what I do. And I thank you all very much for coming and pass it forward. Thank you very, very much.